c'est toujours un plaisir de vous voir. Et voilà, avant que je commence, est-ce qu'il y a des questions sur ce qu'on a fait hier? Tout est beau? Super. Alors on y va, c'est parti. Donc aujourd'hui, on va parler du manuscrit, on va parler de l'abstract. Comme vous avez déjà entendu dire à plusieurs reprises, l'abstract est lu bien plus souvent que le manuscrit. La première des choses quand vous faites une recherche, c'est le titre qui apparaît et ensuite l'abstract. Donc, les gens lisent le titre, les gens lisent l'abstract. Si ça les intéresse, ils continuent plus loin. Anyways, donc on va parler du manuscrit et de l'abstract, mais je vais m'attarder un petit peu plus sur l'abstract que sur le manuscrit. Qu'est-ce qu'on va toucher? On va regarder les points saillants, différents styles, l'abstract, comment l'optimiser pour toutes les infos dont on a parlé ce matin, optimiser aussi pour les mots-clés et pour le nombre de mots. Alors voilà, c'est parti. Donc, la première des choses qu'on fait, comme on a dit hier, c'est de revoir les instructions pour auteur. C'est super important. Ça vous donne word count, les styles. Souvent, ils ont un sidebar, c'est-à-dire mettre en contexte what's known, what's new, what are the implications. Et ça varie selon la revue. Des fois, c'est en bullet points, des fois, c'est en phrases entières, des fois, c'est maximum 75 mots, des fois, c'est maximum temps et temps par bullet point, etc. Donc, super important de lire les instructions pour auteur de la dite revue. Et ensuite, vous avez naturellement aussi le abstract word count. Des fois, c'est 150 mots et des fois, c'est 100 mots, et des fois, c'est 250 mots, 300 mots. Ça peut varier d'une revue à l'autre. Donc, si on vous demande 150 mots et que vous allez en soumettre 300, ça ne marche pas tellement. Et aussi, si l'abstract est structuré ou non. Ensuite, le présentateur ce matin, il a touché à reporting guidelines. Ce qui est intéressant parce que ça se chevauche un petit peu avec ce que j'allais présenter. De toute façon, donc voici les reporting guidelines dont il a parlé avec les liens web. Donc vous avez Consort pour clinical trials, Consort Pro for patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials, Prisma for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, Squire for quality improvement, START for radiology, Strobe for cohort studies, Cheers for economic, etc., etc. Maintenant, cette année, il y a eu un petit peu une révision par the Equator Network sur les Sager Guidelines qui veut qu'on parle aussi de sex and gender. Donc, si votre recherche inclut les deux sexes, quelles sont les inclusions, exclusions, etc., quels sont les subgroup analyses, si ça n'inclut pas les deux sexes, spécifier pourquoi et quelles sont les retombées. Donc, voici aussi le lien pour ça. Donc, ce dont on se sert principalement, ce serait Prisma, Consort, etc. Il y a aussi Spirit pour les protocoles dont il a parlé ce matin. So, general style. À nouveau, je vais parler beaucoup en anglais. Les slides sont en anglais pour vous encourager à réfléchir dans la langue ciblée. La langue ciblée est en anglais pour les revues internationales. So, general style, what they usually ask for is that you number the pages, is that you use the active voice, you minimize jargon, you minimize the abbreviations. Some say no abbreviations at all in the abstract. Some say it's okay, but minimize. So again, you have to read your author instructions. Avoid bullet points except in the sidebar, if applicable. Be specific, avoid there is, there was, it is, it was, and so on. Write for your target audience and reference any and all facts stated. What does that remind you of? Hello, plain language. Ok, c'est exactement ce qu'on a fait hier. So, what's the order of writing? Hier, Sylvana Côté, elle a dit que la première des choses qu'on fait, c'est d'écrire l'abstract. C'est vrai, mais dans une certaine mesure. C'est-à-dire, comme abstract préliminaire, oui. Comme abstract final, il sera à la fin. Pourquoi? La première des choses qui est facile à écrire, c'est la méthode. La méthode, vous l'avez. Vous l'avez dans le protocole, la recherche est terminée maintenant, vous savez ce qui a été fait, etc., etc. Donc, methods, easy. Results and figures, établir quelles sont les figures, quels sont les tableaux, etc. Ensuite, l'intro et la discussion, que vous allez écrire plus ou moins en parallèle. Et à la fin, vous allez reprendre cet abstract préliminaire que vous aurez peut-être écrit, mais sinon, à la toute fin, vous faites l'abstract. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est plus facile à ce moment-là de ressortir les plus belles phrases de votre manuscrit et de les mettre en forme concise dans l'abstract. Okay? Alors, vous ressortez les faits les plus importants, les plus belles phrases, etc. Vous allez le polir pour réduire le nombre de mots, etc. Et finalement, à partir de la façon que vous avez bien poli votre abstract maintenant, certaines phrases seront meilleures dans l'abstract que dans le manuscrit. Vous pouvez retourner les changer. So, this is what you do at the very end. And after that, you finish with your title, your final title. And we'll go into all of these in a minute. Also a cover letter, but the cover letter you don't do until your manuscript is done. It's really the last thing. So, how do you start? Like, where do you start, okay? You're going to tell a story. You're going to give a message. You did a certain research. What is the message that you're wanting to transmit? So what was the purpose of your research, and so on and so forth. You list all your ideas. You organize them. You group them, what's important, what's not. The order of subsections, generally, it's easier to start with familiar and move into new. Okay? Your audience, whichever it is, can relate to something familiar, and then you present the new information. Again, general to specific or concrete, familiar to new. Also in order of importance, the most important thing at the beginning. You may have headings, subheadings, again, according to the journal instructions. You may or may not have headings in the discussion, again, depending on the journal, each one is different. If you're going to put in headings, at least 2 subheads per heading, and make sure the structure of them is parallel. So if you have some headings that are 3 words, you don't suddenly have a heading that's an entire sentence. Okay, just make sure they stick to whatever specific format you happen to be using. So, okay, now you're in the process of writing. Again, like yesterday, you're going to structure your paragraph so that it's one idea per paragraph, which they call the nut or the topic idea, the nut of the paragraph. Again, short paragraphs, but keep them at least 2 sentences. Especially for academic writing, you want it more than 2 sentences. You present your supporting arguments in the order of least to most important, logical progression from one to the next, or they could be in chronological order, or they can be in familiar to new, known to unknown, whichever best fits the particular topic you're working on. And again, like yesterday, you may have a concluding sentence, but that is optional. Any questions on that? This is what we did yesterday. This part of it. Okay? So there's something called segue words, which improves the flow so the reader can easily follow. So first or second or third, further, in addition, blah, blah, blah. At the end, to summarize or in summary. We're going towards shorter things, so you don't say firstly, you say first. There's a movement now to go away from furthermore to further and so on, just to keep things kind of short and sweet. Okay, so as an exercise, we're not going to do it now, but just as an exercise, what you can do go back to something you've written, okay, and do a reverse outline. See if it flows. See if in each paragraph the flow works, and between one paragraph and the other if the flow works, so that your audience, your target audience, whichever it is, can easily follow what you're trying to say, okay? So you do reverse outline. In the left margin, you write the topic of each paragraph. Is it focused? Is it clear? In the right-hand margin, you say, how does each paragraph advance the story? Is it logical? Does each paragraph fit in the overall structure, and how? Or do you need to change the place of some of the paragraphs? Sometimes you do. How would you improve it? How would you improve the structure, and so on? Okay? So this is an exercise you can do at home, just to get a rough idea of how to fit a general thing so that it's coherent. So research papers, you have different styles, comme on le sait. Donc il y a le style APA pour ceux d'entre vous qui sont en psycho. C'est souvent APA, pas toujours, mais souvent. Et il y a le style AMA pour ceux qui sont en biomédical, ou aussi pour ceux qui sont en psycho, dépendant de ce que vous écrivez. Des fois, la revue vous demandera AMA. Okay? MLA, not so much dans ce que vous êtes, c'est surtout pour les sciences humaines. Alors, on va revoir un petit peu les différences entre AMA et APA. La différence qui se pose à vue d'œil, c'est les références. En style AMA, elles sont en ordre, comme j'ai dit hier, en ordre de citation. Donc, la première fois que vous citez quelque chose, c'est numéro 1. La deuxième fois, c'est numéro 2. Le troisième qui est cité, c'est numéro 3. Le quatrième, etc. Okay? Ce qui veut dire que dans votre liste de références, la liste de références, forcément, sera en ordre chronologique des citations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. En APA, les références, les citations sont toujours entre parenthèses. Donc, vous avez Brown et al. Ou whoever it is. Okay? Et donc, la liste de références sera en ordre alphabétique par auteur. Et c'est ça la grosse différence qu'on remarque dès le départ entre AMA et APA. La deuxième différence, la grosse différence qui se pose, c'est au niveau de l'intro. L'intro dans AMA is short and sweet. Up to, let's go. Okay, we know this is what we're doing, goodbye. L'intro en APA, par exemple, elle est longue. Elle peut facilement être plusieurs pages et elle comprend différentes choses dont qu'on va regarder après. Mais si vous soumettez en APA une introduction de moins d'une page ou d'une page à peu près, on vous dira, well, élaborez s'il vous plaît. Okay. Donc ça, c'est les deux grosses différences qui se posent. Ensuite, vous avez des petites différences sur les chiffres. En AMA, c'est surtout en chiffres, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tandis qu'en APA, tout ce qui est moins que 10 est éplé. Donc, 5, F-I-V-E. In APA, you have strict formatting rules. What appears on the title page, how does the title page appear, what's in bold, what's in italics, qu'est-ce que c'est qui est en retrait, qu'est-ce que c'est qui est centré, etc. Dans AMA, ce n'est pas tellement strict. Tant que vous avez une certaine cohérence, ça va. In terms of language, they both have bias-free language, except that APA specifies it more. So what do we mean by bias-free? You won't speak of schizophrenics as a word, for example. You will say patients with schizophrenia or something like that, so as not to label the person. The person is an entire person, but the person still has a disease called schizophrenia, okay, just as an example. So that would be bias-free. Also, gender. You try to avoid now, in both AMA and APA, you try to avoid the his-her construct. So some people use the singular they. I'm not big on singular they. But on peut contourner pour ne pas avoir à se servir de pronoms aussi souvent. Here in AMA now they put in, this is something new, they put in, like I said, the sex and gender guidelines, where you have to specify whether you used both sexes or not, and if not, why not, and so on, and if you did, then what are your subgroup analyses, and so on. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions là-dessus? Oui.
What's wrong with the singularity?
There's nothing wrong with it as such. I'm not keen on it because I'm old school, so to me, they is plural. There's nothing wrong with it. It's used more and more commonly. I prefer to just avoid pronouns altogether, just to turn the sentence around so you don't need the pronoun. Because to me, the singular they, I mean, there's, to me, an ambiguity. Are we talking about one person, more than one person? Yeah. Any questions on this before I move on? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Vancouver style is simply citations, references rather. In fact, you'll see, I'll show you later, the ones I use is mostly Vancouver style. It's the ones that are very similar to PubMed. Okay. Yeah.
Really small question, but when talking about sex, should you say male, female, or men, women, boys, girls, or is there something?
Is there something? Okay, so let me backtrack a minute. Before we used to talk about subjects. Now we don't talk about subjects anymore. We talk about participants, and we relegate subjects to animals. I mean, it's still used, but there's a trend to stay away from the word subjects and go toward participants. I know what you're saying. So male, female in English is a little bit like the subject's business. But sometimes you can't avoid it in terms of if you're dealing with an age range that encompasses both children and adults. You can't really say men, women if you're talking about a 12-year-old.
Oh, okay. So
you know?
would it be preferable if I was only talking about both, for example, to say men rather than male?
Yeah. 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 But again, it depends on the context as well. Anything else? Okay. So if we do a sample, just a little bit of a guideline, if you will, not a guideline in the sense of what they did this morning, but more of a feel, okay? Are we on the right track with our number of pages? So if you're writing an AMA style, for example, and you're writing a double-spaced Word document, Introduction, Methods, Results, Discussion is known as IMRAD, and that's the order that the paper will appear in. They say the introduction is more or less one page. If you have about 18 double-spaced pages, again, it's rough. It's very rough. It's just to give you an idea. Okay, so you'd have one page of intro, 2 to 3 pages of methods, 2 to 3 pages of results, 3 to 5 pages of discussion, 5 figures and tables, and approximately 30 references. Again, that changes from one journal to the other, okay? But what I wanted to show you is this. If you take the intro and the discussion, that takes approximately the same space as the methods and the results, okay? So that you know more or less if you're on the right track. Again, that can change depending on what you're writing. If you're writing up a certain methodology, obviously your methods will be longer. But give or take, if you're writing AMA style, this is approximately what it looks like. There was a question somewhere? Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The introduction in APA could easily be 7 or 8 paragraphs, because the introduction in APA touches a whole bunch of things. It touches on the context, why are you doing the research, and so on and so forth. It touches on a literature review. It touches on the models, what models are available, which one did you choose and why. which questionnaires were available, which ones did you choose, and why. Whereas the intro in AMA style doesn't bother with that. Okay? It gives you a short resume of the lit review, and that's about it. I'll show you. So the AMA will have approximately 3 or 4 paragraphs, give or take, which takes about a page and a quarter, give or take. The first thing, of course, is context. Why are we talking about this? Why is it important? What is it? Always important, like we said yesterday, to define any terminology that you're going to be using. If you're going to talk about a certain disease, define it quickly. Give quickly the incidence or the prevalence or whatever. Why are we talking about this? So give a little bit of background. Then you go into what others have done, which is your lit review, but short. So what have the others done, and what's the equipoise? Like, what's the question? What is the research question? Why is it important for me to do research on this right now? We already know what the others have done, so why am I doing this research? Okay, that's the equipoise. And then the third one, the last one, will be the hypothesis and your objectives. There are no results or conclusions in the intro. Now, this has changed with time. Okay, so if you look up an older study, you may find results in the intro, but with time, now they don't want it. Okay, so versus the APA, which, like I said, is 6 or 7 paragraphs with context and introduction again, relevance, discussion of literature, and so on and so forth. Questions up to now? Everybody's good? Okay. So here's an example. Here's an example of a paper, an introduction. I'm not saying it's the best introduction in the world. Don't use it as a model. But it's just an example. Here, by the way, is your Vancouver style, give or take, where you have the last name of the person with the initials. There's no periods. Very often they will ask you for the first 3 authors to be spelled out. I didn't bother for lack of space. Et al., whatever. Then the title, the name of the journal, the year. You don't have to put the actual date. The year is enough. Which number, which month, whatever it appeared in. The volume number, rather, and the page numbers, and the DOI. The DOI is nice, because now you can just click on the DOI, and it brings you right to the actual study. It's just so much easier than having, like previously, to go into PubMed. Okay? So anyway, here's the intro. So the first paragraph, so here's your going to be context and so on and so forth. The maternal and infant health benefits of breastfeeding, including reduced risk of maternal malignancy and reduced risk of childhood obesity, are well documented, again with some references. And again, you'll note the references as superscripts. Consequently, supporting breastfeeding has been a public health goal in the US for at least 2 decades, and again with your citation numbers, and you'll notice that they come after the period. Although there's been overall improvement in national breastfeeding rates over this time frame, and again, the superscript comes after the comma, the rates of exclusive breastfeeding, and here's your definition, your abbreviation defined, which is recommended through the first 6 months of life, remain low. Okay? So this is your context. There's not enough breastfeeding. There's not enough women giving birth in these hospitals that favor breastfeeding. So this is the second and third paragraph kind of together. According to the Center for Disease Control, blah, 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 the national 3 and 6 months rates are 46 and 25%. In addition, they're notable, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative was launched to improve breastfeeding worldwide, So here's the thing. To date, only 26% of US babies are born in baby-friendly hospitals. But post-hospital data regarding duration of exclusive breastfeeding among women who deliver are limited by region and have not included women from the Deep South. So there's your problem. So what are we going to do about it? So this is the last paragraph. While many studies have identified the barriers to breastfeeding, few have described the lived experience of breastfeeding from women in their own words. Moreover, there is a paucity of qualitative data. Therefore, our study sought to analyze the thoughts and the attitudes toward breastfeeding among women who deliver, blah, blah, blah. Okay? It's not the perfect intro, but it just gives you a rough. Okay? Questions, comments? So, like I said, you do not, yes? Depending where it fits best. As in, does it apply to the whole sentence, in which case it goes at the very end? Or does it apply just to one part of the sentence, in which case it goes where that part happens to be? But, yeah, at the end of the sentence, if it applies to the whole sentence. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So like I said, we try not to put any results in the introduction. A lot of papers working on lab, animal studies and so on and so forth, animal studies, cell studies, whatever. They used to always give the results in the intro. We will show that this, that, and the other. Just follow with us, and this is what we're going to show. But now we're changing that. There's a trend to get away from giving results, and this is one way of doing it. For example, our study provides essential information on blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We first performed a detailed analysis, and we studied the presence of overtime, okay? So it tells you what they're doing, but it doesn't tell you what they found. As opposed to, we will show that, blah, blah. Okay? So yesterday somebody asked me about tenses, and I said we'd talk a little bit about it today. So the past, present, and future walked into a bar, and it was tense. So the present tense, like I said yesterday, is the accepted facts, things that everybody knows. The prevalence of a certain condition is whatever percentage and so on. Present tense. Past tense is the literature, okay? The literature showed that blah, blah, blah. And any methods and results from your own study. Why? Because your study is done. It's fini. Okay? So now that your study is done, it's in the past. We did this, we did that, we did the other, we found this, and we found that. Okay? So I know that in different fields, this is still not quite used as much. In different fields, they often do use the present tense. But like I said, the trend is to use the past. Questions? Yeah.
What counts as an accepted fact? Like if a researcher found something, that would be past.
That's past, correct, yeah.
But it's not a fact but it's a fact that they found it.
Something that's accepted would be autism is more prevalent in boys. That kind of thing, because everybody has agreed on that. But, okay, autism is more prevalent in boys, but Brown et al. In their study of 1,300 children found that blah, 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 past tense. Okay?
So it's something that you wouldn't reference.
It's not that you wouldn't reference it, you do.
Okay.
But it's something that's no longer disputed
Okay.
by anybody. Like, there's a consensus that says that, yeah, that's what it is. And you can have 10 references. And you probably do, yeah. Okay. So yes, you can, especially since in AMA style, the references don't take any space, right? So you can easily have 10 numbers, sure. Okay. And that would be in the present. But if there's any kind of finding that's not necessarily accepted by consensus, then yes, pass. So how do you write your methods? This morning we talked about protocol, publishing your protocol. But you can't do that within the body of your 2,700 word paper. Okay, yes, you can put the protocol into supplementary material if you want, but within the context of your paper of 2,700 words, let's say, or 3,500 words, there is no space for that entire protocol. Okay? So there is also another thing, is that if you're going to put stuff into supplemental materials or appendices, whatever you want to call them, on the web, yes, you're allowed. But your paper, the body, the main paper, has to be standalone. Which means that, yes, you can reference the supplemental material, but no, it should not be necessary for the understanding of the reader. It's something that the reader can go look at if he wants to delve in further, but he doesn't need it to his understanding of the material. So, what do you put into your methods? The info. The same info has appeared in the protocol, but you tighten it big time into only the important things. There are specific sections. One of them would be study design, for example. What would you put in study design? The type, the place, where is it taking place? Is it in Montreal? Is it in China? Is it in England? Where is it taking place? The dates. The place also could be a difference between rural and urban. Could be anything depending on your study, but it should be specified. Just like he said this morning with respect to the reporting guidelines, you have to specify the place and the date. It's only, the slightest thing you can do. And then there could be a different section on participants, or very often it's study design and participants together, in which case you would have one paragraph for each one. So in participants, in methods, you must, if you have participants, you don't necessarily, but if you do, you must have the inclusion and exclusion criteria. That's super, super important. The ages of the people a priori, not the ones that actually participated, but what you were looking at. So let's say you were looking at an age range between 18 and 25. That would be specified, okay? Whatever age range you're looking at, it has to go in there. And also the ethics statement, don't forget, if you're working with humans, you need to say something to the effect that the ethics committee has gone over it, it's fine, and the participants have given consent, signed consent, children given assent, whatever. If you're working with animals, you have to say something to the effect, again, it was passed by the Board of Ethics, and no animals were harmed in the process, blah, blah, blah. But you have to include that. Then the intervention, if applicable, the outcome measures. So under this you would have primary outcomes, secondary outcomes. Again, the same type of thing, is because we didn't talk to each other before giving the presentations, but the same type of thing he was talking about this morning. In order for people to be able to use your data, all the data has to be there, okay? And these are the minimal requirements in the methods section. Randomization and blinding, if applicable. If you have questionnaires, again, which questionnaires did you use? And you give the exact names of the questionnaires and so on and so forth. Again, the intervention, you would say if it was by phone or in person, interview, whatever it is, okay? And then a paragraph for statistical analysis. It's not the plan that he was talking about this morning, which can take several pages. It's one paragraph or two paragraphs, that's it. questions on this? For systematic reviews, again, with the reporting guidelines, you have to, again, give, for just an example, you have to give the search strategy. How did you come up with these titles? What did you do with them? Who decided, if there were duplicates, who decided if something was appropriate or was not appropriate, and so on. So we conducted a comprehensive systematic review of studies. Again, this is an example from something that was published. We searched which databases and which interface and so on, which were your keywords, briefly. You don't have to give the list that he showed this morning of 2 pages of keywords, but the main ones, briefly. We limited our search to studies between this year and that year, so the inclusion-exclusion criteria apply. The age criteria, the language criteria, any other criteria you're going to use to include studies or to exclude studies. The same as you're doing with participants, except that it's with articles. So that's it. We included these, we excluded those, and so on and so forth. And then, who screens the titles, and so on and so forth. So 2 of the authors screened the identified titles after removal of duplicates. The same authors then screened the abstracts and selected which full-text manuscript to retrieve and classified them accordingly, and blah, blah, blah. Okay? So that applies to systematic reviews. So sometimes people say to me, well, you know, you've read so many, what's something that's standard that I can use, or relatively standard? These are some standard sentences that come up time and time and time again. We conducted a randomized controlled trial of blah, 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 as opposed to the passive, which would be a randomized controlled trial was done. No, go active, okay? This is an example of the ethics statement. The protocol was approved by the review board of whichever institution. Parents provided written informed consent. Children aged 7 and over provided assent. This is pretty standard, but again, you know, you modify it for your own uses. And for review, we searched these databases for blah, blah, blah. Participants, children aged whatever, were eligible if they presented with exclusion criteria were. This is just very, very, very fairly standard. So for the stats, again, some standard phrases. We estimated that a total sample of would provide 80% power to identify the mean difference in at a 2-sided alpha of 0.05. Or we performed univariate analyses using these tests, could be other tests, multiple logistic regressions, and so on and so forth. Data were analyzed using, and you would always put the, le logiciel avec le numéro de la version et le nom de la compagnie, et l'endroit d'où ça vient. So data were analyzed using SAS for Windows, for example, and then the significance, p-values less than 0.05 indicated statistical significance. These are fairly standard. Questions? So we come to the results section, which is a little more difficult to write than the methods section, because now you've really got to organize which results appear where, and so on and so forth. There is an easy way of doing it, which is take up the same paragraphs you had for the methods and write what you got in the way of results. So your first paragraph could be participants. Okay, your study design as in place, that we already know. So participants, okay, what are your participants? The next one could be primary outcome. The one after that could be secondary outcomes, whatever. But this is more or less how you would organize it. So you could organize it in the same order as the methods. You would include a flow diagram if applicable. So this is the type of thing, again, that he was talking about this morning. If you have, say, a randomized controlled trial with 2 arms, it would compare the two arms, how many people were approached, how many were eligible, how many refused to do it. They didn't want to be part of the study for whatever reason. How many were lost to follow-up, how many were finally analyzed. Again, like he said this morning, if you have too many people refusing to do it or dropping out, it means there's something wrong with whatever it is that you're proposing, okay? And that has to be noted. It could be the best intervention in the universe, but if nobody wants to do it, you know, there's something there. So something that would have to be explained. Why such a high dropout rate? Or why did nobody want to participate? And so on. So these are important things to look at. The same thing for if you're doing a systematic study, systematic review, the same thing would apply to the papers you found. Okay, we looked for so and so many papers, so and so many were duplicates, so and so many were rejected, and so on. Then you have your table 1 of participant characteristics, and again, this is fairly standard. Your first figure would be your flow diagram. Your first table, if you have participants, would be participant characteristics. So what goes into there? Participant characteristics is anything to characterize the population so that A, the reader has an idea who we're dealing with, because they're a subset of who your inclusion criteria were, okay? You wanted to include X whatever, but the ones you finally included are these. So you want to know what their characteristics were, because that would influence the interpretation of your results, okay? If you have several groups, you want to make sure that at baseline they're the same or they're similar. So again, you would look at whatever characteristics are important to the field of study you're in to see that your groups are similar. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe they differ in something or other, and that has to be pulled out, okay, and talked about. And then the rest of it is outcomes. Generally, most journals will allow you about 5 tables and figures, give or take. Yes, you can put more in the supplementary, but again, your main manuscript should include whatever is necessary for the reader to be able to understand the study. You try not to repeat information from the graphics, the tables, into the text. You don't have to repeat everything. You assume that the reader is smart enough to be able to understand it, except for your primary outcome. That one you do repeat. If the table's very short, you write it out in text. So don't submit a table that's 1 line long. It doesn't make sense. 2 lines long, it still doesn't make sense. It's just like 1 sentence in the text. So no need for an extra table there. And all the entries of a table should be similar. So you can't have a table starting off this way with 5 columns, then moving on to something with 2 columns, and so on and so forth, all in the same table. It doesn't work. So here, for example, this is another study. It's super important, like I said, to be able to characterize that cohort that you're working with, if you're working with participants. Who is in your cohort? Why? Because depending who it is, it may affect the interpretation of the results. There was one study in particular, for example, that was done on a very low-income population. So is that study generalizable to the entire population or not? Because if they were only low income, for example, does it apply to the others? Not necessarily. So it's important to characterize it, who it was, what were the ages, and so on and so forth. So this would be the very first thing that would appear in your results section. We worked with X number of people, the age was, the mean age was, the median age was. Again, be careful of mean and median, it's not the same thing. If you've got normal distribution, yeah, it's fine. But if your distribution is not normal, then mean and median are very different, and it's important to state both. So here, for example, it's just one example. This was a study on young sports athletes who sustained, like football players who received the ball in the head or whatever, and who subsequently died. They looked at the brains of young people who had died for whatever reasons, and then analyzed how many of those young athletes died because of a concussion, okay, or how many had a concussion among those who died. So among the 152 brain donors, the age of death ranged from 13 to 29, and here's your mean with standard deviation. And here, like yesterday, we said we could abbreviate that. You don't have to say see results in table 1, so just table 1 in parentheses. Another thing I forgot to say yesterday, you cannot start a sentence with a numeral. Ok, on commence pas par un chiffre, donc ça c'est le mot 11, éplé, plutôt que 1, 1. Ok, on ne peut pas commencer une phrase avec un chiffre. So, 11 brain donors were female, 141 avec le pourcentage were male, one was blah, blah, blah. And because they wanted to know among the brain donors who had died because of a concussion and so on or whatever, suicide was the most common cause of death, followed by unintentional overdose, and no differences in cause of death based on the concussion status. Okay? So this would be your participant definition. Not definition, but description. And again, with the reference to the exact table where you would have all the details. When we talk about statistics, be careful. Statistics can be reported in certain ways and whatever. Always give an effect size. You know, something can be statistically significant, but the effect is so small that it really makes no difference. Or the effect size could be very big. Either way, it's important to, in some fashion, to report on effect size. In terms of decimal places, don't report p-values to 4 decimal places. Please don't. They're generally to 2 decimal places. When they're really small, it could be 3 decimal places, and if it's less than 0.001, it's simply less than 0.01. Okay? Not this whole long thing, okay? Just like that. Precision of results, so be careful. Again, it's so easy for you to just take the value that appears in your statistical results page and your output, your data output, and just put in 4 decimal places all over, but there's really no need for it, and it loses. You know, the old adage, less is more. It loses if you put too much precision. First of all, it's not scientifically accurate anymore. It's only as accurate as the significant digits. And it becomes meaningless. Like, what does it mean if the average age was 13.5315? What's it mean? As opposed to saying the average age was 13.5. 13.5, I know it's approximately 13 and a half. 13.5136. There's no need to report that kind of precision. So here's an example of this consort flow chart. Assessed for eligibility, and in brackets you have the number. How many were excluded because they didn't meet the inclusion criteria? How many because they declined to participate? How many for other reasons? So how many were randomized? This consort applies to randomized controlled trials. How many were randomized? This is the 2 arms. You could have 3 if you had 3 arms or whatever. So this is the allocation. How many were allocated to the intervention in each arm? how many received the intervention in each arm, how many did not receive the intervention for whatever reasons. Again, it's important to know. How many were lost to follow-up and give the reasons, how many discontinued the intervention for whatever reason, and in the end, how many were analyzed. So that at a glance, you can easily see what's what. And like yesterday, I said there's lots of white space, only one color, and so on. So easy to read. The same thing for systematic reviews. So this one is the Prisma flow chart, the number of records identified, the number of additional records, the number of records after the duplicates are removed, the number of records screened and excluded, the number of full-text articles that you're going to go for, how many were excluded of those and with reasons, so how many are now included in a qualitative and how many are included in quantitative. Again, very clean, very neat, and all the information is right there. So then we move to the discussion. So you've now written your intro, your methods, your results. Your discussion is approximately 6 paragraphs, give or take, okay? Give or take. It matches the intro. So your first paragraph has to match the intro and say, you know, we conducted a randomized controlled trial to see if blah, blah, blah. Okay, you're bringing it back. And you answer whatever questions in that first paragraph. You answer the questions that were posed in that introduction, but short and sweet the first paragraph, generalize in generalities, not in specific numbers necessarily, and it's after that that you go into the primary outcomes with the details, the interpretation in the context of the existing literature, and then the secondary outcomes and the strengths and limitations. Now, in some journals, strengths and limitations goes at the very end. In some, it goes at the beginning. Again, read your other instructions, okay? But it should include your paper should show that you have reviewed your own work critically, okay? You've done the work of the reviewer. You have answered any questions the reviewer or reader might have. So here's an example of a first paragraph. This is the one that I was talking about before with brain donors. So among 152 brain donors who donated their brain to whatever, blah, 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 and were younger than 30 years, 63.41% had autopsy-confirmed concussion. They could have substituted concussion for CTE. I don't know how standard an abbreviation that is. I didn't look it up. But, I mean, they're talking about chronic traumatic as opposed to any old concussion, so fine. In any case, and then they go into more results, and the study highlights that CTE can affect amateur as well as professional contact sports and so on and so forth. In this cohort, look at this last sentence. In this cohort of players younger than 30 years, 11 of 11 football players and 1 of 1 hockey players were diagnosed with concussion. So this is a pretty strong conclusion. Okay, this is all the first paragraph. So strengths and limitations. Be careful because strengths and limitations doesn't only say, okay, well, I have this limitation, that one, the other one. Bring out the strengths of your study. Hey, promote it, okay? It's your study. You are the best marketer for passing on that message, whatever the message is, okay? So say what the strengths were. There were strengths in your study. What were they, okay? Maybe you used a huge cohort. Maybe it was in a big city. Maybe it was in a tertiary care hospital. Maybe there was only one person doing all the evaluations, so the standard, and so on, okay? What were your strengths? Bring them out. So here's an example. This is the breastfeeding one. A strength of our study is the use of the phenomenal or whatever approach. This approach rejects the idea that the infant feeding experience is an objective entity. Rather, it is experienced within a person's subjective context and so on and so forth. So it's a strength. We ask them qualitative questions. While the breastfeeding promotion practices are important, our findings suggest that post-hospital support for breastfeeding mothers is needed to achieve exclusive breastfeeding duration goals. Okay? So this is the strength of our study. We asked them exactly what was missing from the literature. And then, of course, there's limitations. You have to be critical. You have to read your own article with a critical eye. You have to be critical of your study the way any peer reviewer would be. Bring out the negatives, because it's better if you bring them out than if your reviewer writes you a note. Could you please explain how blah, blah, blah? Okay? Just put it down first. Okay? So there are a few notable limitations, because they will find them. Don't kid yourself. They will find them. Okay? So there are a few notable limitations, although demographically similar, the sample, blah, 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 and so on. And then you can mettre une bémol. Pourquoi que, how did we overcome this limitation? Yes, it's a limitation, but, okay? So our analysis doesn't reflect, for those who didn't answer the open-ended question. However, the feeding group should not have impacted the number of comments and so on and so forth. So they're putting it in perspective. A second limitation is that this, that, the other, subject to recall bias, and so on. Okay. I once reviewed a paper where je regardais les chiffres et puis ça concordait pas. Les chiffres, à un moment donné, étaient avec tant de participants, à un autre moment donné, il en manquait une centaine. Je suis retournée au chercheur et je lui ai dit où sont passés les 105 participants. Ah, je croyais qu'on n'allait pas s'en apercevoir. No, it doesn't work. Okay. Il y aura toujours des pertes, mais on le sait qu'il y aura des pertes, mais il faut les dire. Okay. Non, il faut faire ressortir les limites de l'étude. Il n'y a pas. Okay. However, you can put a positive spin on it for whatever reason. Okay. And then your conclusion, just a summary paragraph, short and sweet. Dépendant de la revue, il y a des conclusions qui sont à part, ou alors c'est le dernier paragraphe de la discussion, l'un ou l'autre. À nouveau, c'est selon la revue, mais c'est court. Pas de nouvelles idées dans la conclusion et pas de référence dans la conclusion, généralement. À nouveau, selon la revue, ça peut varier, mais généralement, pas de référence et pas de nouvelles idées dans la conclusion. C'est juste vraiment un sommaire de tout ce qui a été dit jusque-là. Voilà. And no hyperbole. We are the best and the very first to show that maybe you are, maybe you're not. So if you're not, please don't say it. So there you go. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions avant qu'on passe à l'abstract? On va prendre une pause dans à peu près un quart d'heure. Avant qu'on passe à l'abstract, est-ce qu'il y a des questions? J'ai été relativement rapidement. Questions, commentaires? Donc, ça concorde beaucoup avec ce qui a été dit ce matin. Donc, ça vous le remet en perspective. Anything else? Les différences entre AMA et APA. Méfiez-vous dans les author instructions parce que la revue peut demander l'un ou l'autre. Autre chose? That's it? Okay. So, abstract. Are we talking about a painting? No. Okay. Qu'est-ce qu'on va regarder pour l'abstract? On va regarder structuré versus non structuré. On va regarder optimisation pour l'info, pour keywords, pour word count. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un graphical abstract et qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un lay abstract? À nouveau, si vous avez déjà écrit plusieurs publications, donc vous savez à peu près de quoi il s'agit, c'est pas nouveau pour vous, mais quand même, ça fait pas de mal de le remettre en perspective. Donc, voici l'abstract non structuré. Celui-ci, c'est APA style. APA généralement est non structuré. AMA peut être structuré ou non structuré selon la revue. Mais pour AMA, généralement, c'est non structuré. Qu'est-ce que non structuré veut dire? C'est un seul paragraphe. Ce n'est pas 2, ce n'est pas 3, ce n'est pas 4, ce n'est pas 5, c'est un seul paragraphe. Dans APA, le mot abstract ici irait au centre. Comme je vous ai dit, ils ont des règles très spécifiques pour le formatage. Donc, le mot abstract irait au centre. Ensuite, vous avez votre abstract en un seul paragraphe. Vous remarquerez aligné à gauche seulement, pas à droite. Ce qu'on appelle align left, ragged right. Le mot keywords en italique et en retrait. Les keywords séparés par une virgule et pas de majuscule. Donc, pour tous ceux d'entre vous qui écrivaient pour psycho en APA, ça ressemble à ça. L'abstract structuré, par contre, est sensiblement différent, mais les infos sont les mêmes. La différence, c'est que vous avez les sous-titres. Donc, ça, ce ne sera pas en format APA, ce sera en format AMA, c'est-à-dire pour biomédical. Biomédical, comme je vous ai dit, ça peut être ou structuré ou non structuré. Si c'est structuré, ce sera cette forme ici, avec les mots qui ressemblent vaguement à Objectives, Methods, Results, Conclusions. Okay? Ce qui est à peu près la même chose que votre manuscrit qui est Introduction, Methods, Results and Discussion. Ce n'est pas nécessairement exactement ces titres-là, mais à peu près. Ça peut être background, ça peut être context, ça peut être discussion, ça peut être interpretation, implications. Ça varie selon la revue. À nouveau, l'importance de lire les instructions. Mais c'est à peu près ça. Donc, dans Objectives, vous auriez Background and Aims, que vous allez faire ressortir de votre manuscrit. À nouveau, moi, je préfère écrire l'abstract final à la fin. Une fois que j'ai tout fait, je ressors les meilleures phrases, je ressors toute l'info importante, et ensuite, je réduis le nombre de mots. So, Objectives, Background and Aims, Methods, Design, Setting, Dates, Participants, Intervention, Main Outcome Measure. Et ça, ce n'est pas moi qui le dis, ça c'est dans les guidelines dont il a parlé ce matin. Okay? Results, number of participants, participant characteristics. If you have participants, you may not, but if you do. Statistics and effect size. And conclusions with discussion and implications. Question là-dessus? À nouveau, c'est imprécis. Donc, ça va être très, très, très court, mais malgré que c'est court, vous avez quand même assez de place pour mettre suffisamment d'infos. Pourquoi la nécessité de mettre tellement d'informations? Parce que la plupart des gens commencent par lire l'abstract. Si l'abstract leur plaît et qu'ils trouvent que ça marche vraiment avec la recherche qu'ils font, à ce moment-là, ils liront le manuscrit principal. Mais autrement, non. Okay? Et souvent, ils n'ont même pas nécessairement accès à l'article principal. Parce que, par exemple, l'UDM, ils n'ont pas tous les abonnements. Ils en ont certains, mais pas tous. Okay? Alors, s'ils n'ont pas accès à la revue, à l'article même, oui, ils peuvent écrire à l'auteur et demander « Pouvez-vous m'envoyer une copie, blabla », mais ça met du temps. Et pas tous les chercheurs vont passer ce temps-là. Donc, c'est bien mieux pour vous, si vous voulez être cité, de mettre autant d'infos que possible dans cet abstract. Attirer le plus de lecteurs que possible. Donc, vous mettez toutes les infos, et aussi par esprit de transparence, et aussi parce que dans la charge des réviseurs, ce qu'ils regardent aussi, est-ce que l'abstract reflète bien l'article? Donc, les limites, s'il y a des limites importantes, doivent apparaître ici aussi. Okay? La généralisation, généralisabilité, doit apparaître s'il y a quelque chose, qui est une question quelconque. Ça doit apparaître. La description des participants, tout ce genre de choses doivent paraître dans l'abstract, forcément. Alors, voici un exemple. Je regarde juste là. OK. Un exemple d'un abstract structuré. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez m'en dire? Remembering that not everything that's published is necessarily ideal or optimal. They will publish things even if they're not optimal. But si vous voulez apprendre à le faire comme il faut, à l'idéal, c'est ça qu'on devrait mettre. Donc, quels sont vos commentaires sur celui-là? Je vous le laisse lire. Qu'est-ce qui est bien et qu'est-ce qui manque? Oui. Tel que? Qu'est-ce que vous auriez aimé voir? Ils mettent le nombre. Il y en a 263. Est-ce qu'il y a les âges quelque part? J'ai pas les âges. Je sais que c'est plus que 14, mais OK. Il n'y avait pas de petites filles qui ont donné naissance, c'est bien. Mais c'est tout ce que je sais. Est-ce que c'est des mamans plus âgées, des mamans plus jeunes? Aucune idée. Quoi d'autre? Oui. Non, non. Oui, allez-y. Oui, vous avez raison. Je ne sais pas où est quand. La toute première phrase, l'intro? De quoi? Rate remain low? Ça fait partie du contexte. Où ça? Oh, the results? Les 263 participants? Oui, ça va dans results. À nouveau, ça change au fil des ans. Et il a même noté ça ce matin en parlant de psycho et de mélanger ce qui va dans la méthode et ce qui va dans les résultats. En psycho, souvent, ce que vous avez, c'est que le nombre de participants au final est inscrit dans la méthode. Mais le problème avec ça, c'est qu'au départ, on ne sait pas qu'on va en avoir 263. Au départ, on s'attend, mettons, à 300. Mais sur les 300, il y en a eu seulement 263 qui ont participé. Au départ, peut-être qu'on s'attend à 400, je ne sais pas, whatever it is. Mais le vrai nombre de participants, on ne sait pas avant d'avoir fini l'étude ou avant d'avoir fini la collecte de données. Et c'est pourquoi c'est préférable de le mettre dans la section résultats. Okay. Généralement, on dit, à nouveau, c'est à l'idéal, à l'optimal. Pas tout le monde le fait de la même façon, mais à l'idéal, ce qu'on dit, c'est que méthode, c'est tout ce qui est su a priori quand vous faites votre protocole. Ce n'est pas nécessairement le truc avec lequel vous avez travaillé au final. Okay. Donc, non, moi, je le laisserai absolument ici. Qu'est-ce qui manque encore? Moi, j'aurais aimé que c'est qualitatif, je ne le vois pas nulle part. Je le vois dans le titre A Qualitative Analysis, mais je ne le vois pas ici. Si je vois qu'ils ont fait des thoughts and attitudes, ok, fine, mais j'aurais aimé voir le mot Qualitative Analysis. C'est à ça que vous faites référence? Le design. Ouais. Autre chose? Oui. Non, c'était une étude qualitative, donc peut-être que whatever. Mais par contre, moi, ce que j'aurais aimé voir, parce qu'il parle de breastfeeding, j'aurais aimé voir combien d'entre elles étaient des premières mamans versus elles avaient déjà 3 enfants. Quelque chose de ce genre-là. Pour la première fois ayant donné naissance, est-ce qu'elles allaitent ou non? Et après, si c'est des 2e ou 3e enfants, est-ce qu'on allait ou non? Pour moi, ça aurait été important de le savoir. Et ça, il ne le dit pas. Il ne me décrit pas parmi les participants à quel stade elles sont. Oui. C'est quoi? Celui-ci, il a 251 mots. Ça dépend absolument de la revue. 250, on le retrouve très, très souvent. Très souvent. Mais vous pouvez quand même avoir des abstracts non structurés qui sont beaucoup plus courts. Dans les non structurés, souvent, c'est 150 mots. Mais ça dépend de la revue. Et je vous encourage à utiliser au maximum ce nombre de mots. Vous avez de la place? Allez-y. Donc, si vous avez de la place pour 250, pourquoi vous limitez à 100 mots, par exemple? Okay. Utilisez le nombre de mots accordés. Oui. Ben, vous choisissez ce qui est super important. Primary outcome, super important. Donc, vous faites un focus sur ce qui est super important et le reste, il n'y a pas de place pour tout. Okay. À nouveau, il va vous falloir faire certaines décisions au moment de respecter le nombre de mots. Okay? Donc, une des décisions, ça va être de couper le nombre de mots, c'est ce qu'on va faire tout à l'heure, de couper le nombre de mots, et pour ça, vous vous servez des principes de plain language que j'ai fait hier. Mais une autre décision que moi, je ne peux pas vous faire pour vous, c'est de choisir ce qui est important. Donc, si vous avez une liste de 20 questionnaires, lesquels, par exemple, allez-vous nommer dans l'abstract? Vous ne pouvez pas nommer tous les 20, il n'y a pas de place. Okay? La même chose avec les statistiques. Vous ne pouvez pas nommer toutes les méthodes statistiques dont vous vous êtes servi si vous êtes servi de, je ne sais pas, 10 méthodes différentes. Okay? Donc, il va vous falloir faire un choix à un moment donné. Qu'est-ce qui est le plus important? Oui. Okay. Moi, personnellement, quand on me demande 250, je mets 250.